Your doctor writes a prescription. You pick it up from the pharmacy. You swallow the pill. But here is what nobody tells you. The molecular backbone of that drug. It already belongs to Beijing, 90%. That is China's share of the global peptide synthesis market. And in a second I will show you why this single statistic represents the most dangerous supply chain vulnerability in modern medicine. But that is not the crazy part. Peptides are chains of amino acids, the building blocks of proteins, the foundation of every biological drug you have ever heard of. Insulin, peptide, cancer immunotherapies, peptides. Those wildly expensive GLP-1 weight loss drugs, every single one starts with peptide synthesis. Without peptides, modern medicine stops, not slows down, stops. Wait until you hear how China came to control this choke point. 20 years ago, Western companies dominated peptide synthesis. American, European, today they are almost extinct. This is where it gets disturbing, because this was not an accident. It was engineered, made in China 2025. Beijing is blueprint for technological dominance. Biotechnology was target number 3. Here is the twist nobody talks about. Chinese peptide manufacturers did not just compete on price, they were subsidized into existence. State-backed loans, tax exemptions, export incentives. Beijing turned peptide synthesis into a national priority while Western governments watched their industries crumble. The result? Chinese peptides cost 60 to 70% less than Western alternatives, so Pfizer bought from China, Merck bought from China. Every major pharmaceutical company made the same calculation: short-term savings, long-term dependency. But first, you need to understand what happens when one country controls the molecular foundation of global medicine. This is the part they do not want you to know. Dependency equals leverage. Let me paint you a scenario. Taiwan crisis. Trade sanctions. Diplomatic standoff. Beijing does not need to fire a missile. They just slow down peptide exports. Western pharmaceutical companies keep 6 weeks of peptide inventory, maybe 8 if they are prudent. What comes next is even more shocking. Drug production stops, not reduces, stops. Cancer treatments delayed. Insulin supplies dwindle. Hormone therapies vanish. And here is where it all connects. This is not just about medicine. Peptides power agricultural production, growth hormones for livestock, crop protection. They are also critical for defense applications, biochemical sensors, protective treatments. Beijing does not just control your prescriptions, they control the molecular supply chain for food security and national defense. Now here is the historical pattern nobody connects. This has happened before. Rare earth metals. In the 1,990 seconds, China captured 95% of global production. Today, every electric vehicle battery, wind turbine, and smartphone depends on Chinese rare earths. The pattern is identical. Subsidize, undercut, dominate, control. But here is what makes peptides more dangerous. You cannot easily substitute them. Peptide synthesis requires extreme precision. Every amino acid must link in exact sequence. One error, the drug fails, or worse, becomes toxic. Chinese manufacturers spent 2 decades perfecting this precision. They did not just compete on price, they mastered the craft. While Western companies optimized quarterly earnings, China played the long game. Think about that for a second. When one supplier controls 90% of the market, they control the price. This is just the beginning. Right now, Chinese peptide makers keep prices low, strategic patience. But what happens when they decide to triple peptide prices? When leverage becomes profit extraction, your insulin costs quadruple, not because manufacturing changed, because the supplier can. And Western pharmaceutical companies, they have no alternative, no backup supplier. No plan B. Rebuilding Western peptide manufacturing capacity, that is a 20-year project, minimum, billions in investment. Trained workforce, regulatory approval, quality assurance systems. Meanwhile, China keeps expanding capacity, locking in dominance. Now zoom out. Peptides are not the only choke point. China manufactures 80% of active pharmaceutical ingredients, 60% of medical devices, 90% of antibiotics. Remember the pandemic, when supply chains broke? That was just a preview. This is the part that should terrify policymakers.
Beijing has systematically captured control over the building blocks of modern civilization, and Western governments are only now waking up to the problem.
Here is the uncomfortable truth. There is no quick fix. The CHIPS Act includes biomanufacturing provisions, reshoring initiatives, tax incentives. But even with aggressive investment, Western peptide independence is decades away. For many existing drugs, it may be too late. Your prescription drugs, they are already engineered with Beijing's molecular fingerprint embedded in every dose. Next time you pick up that prescription, remember, the molecule that saves your life, Beijing controls whether it exists at all. If this opened your eyes to hidden power dynamics, hit that subscribe button. We expose what they do not teach in economics class. Drop a comment with your thoughts on supply chain sovereignty.